I used to walk in two worlds. On my father's side, there's a story of settlers from England to Vancouver, a business family, creating such organizations like TELUS and philanthropic organizations like the Vancouver Foundation. On my mother's side, we are Indigenous, Gwich'in First Nation. Our people followed the heartbeat of the caribou through what now some people call Alaska, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. These two worlds came together when my parents met in grade 3. But for most of my life, like so many others, I had to keep these two worlds apart. You see, my grandmother had experienced trauma, discrimination, and racism, and she wanted to protect my generation from that. So we were not allowed to be public with our Indigenous roots. I had to be separate from myself. And this story of separation mirrors a much bigger story, a system that separated Indigenous peoples from their land, from their culture, from opportunity, from capital, from each other. And Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island have been separated from land and their sacred relationship with it. Take for San Francisco, for example, the Ohlone people. They have been separated from their land like so many other communities across North America. But it's not just land, it's ownership. And without ownership, Indigenous communities have been separated and left out of the financial system. Without land as collateral, they've not been able to grow. Without growth, there's been no wealth. And it's a cycle of separation that continues today. But there's a way to break that cycle, to bring things back together. It's called the 7 Generations Lease. And it's using a financial instrument that's very conventional and typical throughout the world, that is well recognized. Let me explain it. Instead of leasing land for 100 years to conventional property developers, Indigenous communities have a choice with 7 Generations Capital to enter into an equity partnership, a partnership that allows the community to be part of decisions, to co-own, to co-create, to co-design projects that create meaningful benefit to the community. Benefits such as revenues, rents, fees, procurement, capacity building. The community benefits from projects in a very deep way. 7 Generation projects restores the environment. 30% of our lands that we develop in community are restored and dedicated for green space. All of our projects have the highest standards of environmental sustainability. And thirdly, culture is respected. Language, ceremony, storytelling is incorporated into projects in a very deep and meaningful way. Community space is created. Health clinics, educational space, housing, community space. If we take a look at some real numbers, this is a real example. On the one hand, in a conventional model, a developer who is extractive might make a $21 million payment to the community for a piece of land and lease it away for 100 years, leaving the community out of the process. Instead, the 7 Generations Capital lease is a partnership where the community benefits 59 times more, just on the financial inclusion metric alone. 59 times more, $1.2 billion over the same period of time. Ownership matters. This is an example of the land. And then, so what would you choose? Inclusion or exclusion? Restoring the land or ignoring it? Regenerating culture or separating culture? For many First Nation communities, unfortunately, that choice is not on the table. Inclusion is not offered. What does inclusion look like? What does cultural respect look like? These are just some examples. And the deep and meaningful relationship we have with communities means that these communities can move forward on their path towards self-determination. The seven generations lease brings things back together. It says you belong and you matter. I had a story told to me by an elder a couple years ago that I will never forget. There was a time when the government and industry decided, without consulting the community, to dam the river that fed the community. The salmon were blocked from entering the streams, and the community starved. And in that period of famine, they went to the riverbanks and they foraged and harvested wild asparagus. That asparagus now, those stories have inspired a project where we are reseeding and replanting that wild asparagus along the same riverbank. And the wild asparagus art and design forms part of the centerpiece of the project. That story is part of their past, and now it's part of their future. We hear these stories through talking circles that we host in community, and it's through these talking circles that we listen and we learn so much. At one of these such talking circles, I sat next to an elder who held my hand, and with tears in her eyes, she said to me, "You see me." And it felt like it was my grandmother talking to me. And those tears were very much about her healing and me healing. For the first time in a development, the community felt like they'd been listened to, and their voices were heard, and they were involved in decisions that had to do with their land. Ten years ago, when my grandmother passed away, I was given permission to be whole. I was offered the choice to walk this world and to self-identify as an Indigenous person. And today I stand before you proudly, a member of the Gwich'in First Nation. And I invite all of you to think about how we together, what we can do to make this world whole. Our land, our communities, our future. What would you build if you could be whole? Because for me, I am now whole, and I invite you to join me. Thank you. Masicho.